Okay, in this brief little lecture, in addition to, I want to continue the discussion of emerging adulthood. In addition to the three primary criteria for adulthood I mentioned in the first lecture, personal responsibility, independent decision making, and financial independence, there are specific developmental tasks and related issues during this period of emerging adulthood. And these center on experimentation in several domains. So, for example, those in this period experiment with various vocational and occupational possibilities. They might experiment with development of new friendships, experiment with intimate non-marital relationships. They maybe experiment with renegotiation of the parent and child bond. And they are definitely experimenting with belief systems, religious, political, moral, etc. Tanner, in 2006, introduced a term he called recentering to describe a three-stage process that captures the transition from adolescence, stage one, into emerging adulthood, stage two, followed by an exit from the transitional period entering young adulthood, stage three. And so what he argues is that emerging adulthood is marked by a recentering process, according to Tanner, in which individuals make temporary role commitments. In fact, you might think of it as a kind of as a serial transition, and therefore temporary role commitments that serve the purpose of exploring potential identities in those domains mentioned earlier. Now, during this active phase of identity exploration, the emerging adult typically attempts to match their changing sense of self with socially sanctioned adult roles. Moreover, in exploring these issues, emerging adults engage in considerable risk-taking as they navigate these treacherous psychological waters. Now, Arnett in 2000 and 2010 has also written about risk-taking. And Arnett and a slew of authors in 2011, L.J. Nelson and Berry in 2005, and Schulman and others in 2005 have all written about risky behaviors. They include unprotected sex, substance abuse, drinking at high speeds, driving at high speeds while intoxicating or while texting, binge drinking, etc. While risk-taking has, in the past, been primarily associated with adolescence, these authors have observed that it is even more prevalent now in emerging adults, as young people typically have less adult supervision or monitoring. Now, parentheses. Could this be the result of the extension of mid-adolescence? Just want to ask that question. Could this be the result of the extension or a result of the extension of mid-adolescence? Close parentheses. Nelson and Berry point out that the cessation of risk-taking behaviors, not in the eyes of the emerging adult, is a necessary criterion for admission into adulthood. Now, the period of EA also makes one vulnerable to depression. Arnett in 2000 and Nelson and Berry in 2005 have written about this. They point to four possible sources of psychological dejection that represent normative manifestations during EA. So separation issues is one source of vulnerability to depression. As an emerging adult attempts to establish some degree of autonomy from their parents. What makes this period particularly conflictual, however, is that there is this urge to become autonomous. This autonomous urge is juxtaposed with a desire to remain connected. So you might have a prototypical emerging adult say something like this. It was hard to move out and separate myself from my parents, but I still hope I can be close to them as I become an adult. There is also the potential for depression in emerging adults when they seriously explore the realm of dating and intimate relationships. Actually, several books have recently come out about emerging adults and dating. It deals with sex and sexual identity, these kinds of things. And often, this potential for depression as they explore the realms of dating and relationship is prior to eventual commitments that might involve cohabitation and eventually marriage. Now, the formation of romantic relationships, while often exciting, will also cause ambivalence and often lead to some nasty breakups. And the reality is lead to depression. Feelings of loneliness can also arise with the scattering of high school friends. Those friends had provided support and companionship. And added to this is the challenge of making new friends and forming new support systems. The exploration of educational and occupational realms also brings normative challenges that understandably provoke concerns about one's competence. Feelings of failure are inevitable, and often those contribute to depression, particularly when one walks this path that requires the development of new and unpracticed skills. The prototypical emerging adult may ask this question: what if I fail? What if I don't get that job? What if I don't get that interview, or I bomb that interview? Unlike previous periods of development, there is a heightened awareness of the challenges associated with growing up. No longer is the question of what do I want to do when I grow up? In EA, this question is nagging, where answers to this question are imperative and require immediate attention. A prototypical emerging adult may say something like this: I'm sure I'm going to settle on something in a few years. I just need more time to figure out my options. I guess what I'm saying is that I don't know what I'm going to be when I grow up. The task at this stage is not only to explore and experiment with life choices in the realms of occupational, educational, social, and romantic belief systems. One must also integrate the outcomes of such explorations in a manner that brings meaning and coherence to one's identity. So during the process of reappraising previous life patterns and experimenting with new possibilities of personal growth, the emerging adult becomes aware of the social and historical context of their life. The authors I mentioned above observed that the ability to become aware of one's aspirations, of one's qualities of character, and the role of one's performance, as well as an appreciation of one's fulfillments, will facilitate the individual's ability to deal with demanding developmental tasks that require attention. Awareness also heightens the sense of uncertainty, which is decidedly different for the confusion that often paralyzes mid-adolescence. The emerging adult is well aware of the decisions that they must make, though often awed by the plethora of possibilities, and therefore express uncertainty about how they should proceed. An awareness then of the necessity exists to integrate these possible selves, turns the psychological spotlight on this daunting developmental task. I'm sorry about those pings if you hear them. My son is texting my wife. Cognitive developmental advances that characterize emerging adults is worth consideration. And I want to refer briefly to Fisher's early work in 1980. You might be asking why I'm going back. Listen, he acknowledges that the ability to integrate one's different identities across these different realms that I have mentioned requires the development of an abstract system of systems. More specifically, the individual must construct a conceptual self-system that cognitively combines the previous single and higher level order abstractions that become available to that individual in their earlier substages of adolescence. Now, this is a lengthy process that requires extensive life experiences, requires considerable reflection, and the support of more mature individuals. And the reason why I'm bringing Fisher up, because I want you to hear the importance of adults. Hear the importance of adults, mature adults, and that necessitates and cooperates with neurological development. Many of adults never achieve this cognitive neurological nirvana, according to Fisher. Now, which might explain what some of you are referred to. It seems like I'm seeing these multiple selves in later people, later adults. Fisher, in 1980, cogently argued that with increasing cognitive development to more advanced stages, it necessitated greater need for support or scaffolding for mature adults. If one is to achieve the potential for optimum development, They need more mature adults in their lives. All right, parentheses. I wonder if what we are experiencing now in what Arnett calls emerging adulthood is the cumulative effects of less adults involved in the lives of children and adolescents over time. Close parentheses. Unlike earlier stages, life for the emerging adult is less structured, with less social support, and there are fewer unambiguous societal norms or rules to guide their behavior. Schulman and others in 2005 concur. They point out that young people find less direction in the form of traditions and customs, and therefore might find themselves akin to a ship without a rudder on open seas. They are rudderless and alone. Alone in the search for their appropriate social role in contemporary society. A prototypical emerging adult begins with this observation. It's been challenging to get life after high school, where we knew what we had to do, where there were teachers and coaches and counselors to guide us. What we are experiencing is a lack of structure, which we all know, right? A lack of structure, a lack of social scaffolding, a lack of mature, loving, agenda-free adults in the lives of these young people. Blessings and peace.